Hi everyone. This is my second attempt making this video. So just so you know that even the professors get garbled up and make a fluff of things and have to start their videos over again, I just had to do that. In large part, it's due to the fact, because you will hear it, you'll hear my cat screaming in the background because my cat has decided that she deserves to be fed at a time she is not normally fed at, and so is just going to stand behind me and scream at me until I give in. And I won't give in. Because any of you who've got cats know you never, ever, ever give in to them. Otherwise, you're so screwed. So the way the Nearpod is working this week is that you're picking up time-wise after we're leaving off in class. So sorry for the people who do the Nearpod before we come to class. You've kind of got to do a bit of a brain flip here. Where we're picking up is at the top of this family tree. William I. He's the person we're most interested in. And as you see at the top of this family tree, to William's left is where it says in red, House of Normandy. That's who we're looking at this week, the Normans. The term the Normans comes from Normandy, which is an area in northwest France. So William I was already Duke of Normandy, and then he actually became King of England. The process of this is what we're going to be mainly focusing on in class. So it doesn't really matter now, except for you to know that William I was Duke of Normandy, and then he became William I, King of England. We also will have been learning how, not just how William became King of England from being the Duke of Normandy, but we're also going to see how William was really clever at making sure that the position of King in England was on really, really, really firm foundations through the Domesday Book, which is a unique primary source. We'll have been looking at several unique primary sources in class, so enough to say that just to remind you that a primary source is something that was written at the time. That's all that a primary source is. And that means that a secondary source is anything produced after. So the Domesday Book is a tax book. Some people call it a census, but it's not, because they're not really interested in who all the people were so much as how much money the different people could pay. The joke was that it was called the Domesday Book because they were so nosy, so inquisitive, it was like the final day of judgment. The joke was that they even wanted to know how many you had right down to the last chicken, in a way that was even more intrusive than God himself would want to know about your chickens. So this meant that William knew exactly how much money he had to play with, which is pretty unique across all the kings in Europe in the Middle Ages, as we will soon be learning. So William I makes himself King of England after the conquest of England. And we're now, this Nearpod's going to look at his descendants. So after William died, his lands were divided between his sons. They're actually all on the next row down on the left. Robert Curthose, Duke of Normandy, William II and Henry I. Long story short, William I thought that it was a great idea to divide up his lands between his three sons. And this was going to be, the happiest way to do it. But, guys, spoiler alert. I mean, if I asked you in class, how do you think this is going to work out? We'd all remember the tetrarchy and go, yeah, no, this is not going to work. And of course, it doesn't work. So William's great plan is that he was going to give Robert Normandy. He was going to give William, who was also called William Rufus, England. Because by this time, the Normans have both lands in Normandy, in the northwest of France, and in England. So the terms of where they govern is really important at this time period. So they've got Normandy and they've got England, and he's like, I'm going to divide it up amongst my sons. They also, if we were in class, I would be drawing this on the board, and you would guaranteed be laughing at me trying to get them all linked together, and we'd all be guessing their names too, because look at this, they're all called the same freaking thing. They're all William or Henry, and I'd be like, hey guys, what do you think his son was called? And you'd be like, is it a Henry or is it a William? And I'd be like, I think it is. So William II is actually called William Rufus to, confuse us. Well, no, to try and confuse us less. But William Rufus dies. And, spoiler alert, some of these sons are more capable and more cunning than others. So when William Rufus dies, Robert Curthose was actually off on crusades. And this meant that Henry, the third son, but never mind, Henry was cunning enough to install himself as King of England and Duke of Normandy. So Robert is like, oh my God, my brother has been such a brat in my absence. I mean, I'm sure many of you have got awful little brothers, but have any of them stolen your kingdom from you? Because that is Robert's problem. So Robert has to come running back from crusade to deal with his upstart little brother. And then his upstart little brother Henry defeats him in battle and keeps him prisoner. And this means that Henry becomes Henry I of Normandy and of England. But you know, fate kind of has its laugh with Henry, because Henry has a son and he thinks his son is the business, and his son is called William. Yeah, he's not original. William, though, he drowns in the White Ship disaster in 1120. And if we were medieval people, the White Ship disaster is like so a story of legend and tale that it's kind of like the Titanic of the Middle Ages. So it's like a major, major disaster story of the Middle Ages. And William, who is the king's heir, dies. And this leaves his daughter as heir. And she is the person, a woman, yay, we're learning about women this week, the Empress Matilda. But Henry doesn't like Matilda, for reasons we'll get into shortly. But Henry doesn't like Matilda. Matilda doesn't like Henry either. Instead, Henry far prefers his nephew. His nephew is called Stephen of Blois, and Stephen is off there on the right-hand side. You see where it says in red, House of Blois? That is Stephen. Henry instead is like, no, I don't want my daughter to inherit because I don't like my daughter. I like my nephew, Stephen of Blois, and I'm going to have Stephen of Blois inherit. So Matilda, in the meantime, has married a guy called the Count of Anjou. There he is on the far left again, Geoffrey Plantagenet, Count of Anjou. She has married him, and Anjou is another big territory in France, so that's going to be important. So Matilda has married Geoffrey. Her father is Henry. Sorry, now there's a train going past. It's a very noisy video this time. And then when Henry dies, all hell breaks loose. Stephen's like, Henry may be his heir, and Matilda is like, I really don't care. I'm his daughter. I am going to be queen. So do you, Stephen. This means that his heir is ambiguous, and we're back with this issue of succession, which we've been well familiar with at this point. So Stephen takes the throne in 1135, throne of England, and Matilda is like, ho-ho, not on my watch. So in terms of the historiography, that's the history of history writing. Stephen has kind of been written off as being a complete drip and really, really useless. And Matilda has been written off as being a tough cookie and a bit of a ball breaker. Certainly, Matilda and her husband set out to remove Stephen from his position as king and make her the queen. So she landed in England in 1139, and she is supported in this by her illegitimate brother, because, you know, these kings, they don't just have their legitimate kids, they've got all sorts of illegitimate kids too. Her half-brother's called Robert of Gloucester. He's not on this because he's not legitimate. In 1141, she gets so powerful, she actually captures Stephen in battle and imprisons him. But she's peed so many people off by this time that she has to give in and release him, which just makes Matilda really, really, really mad. Ultimately, her uncle Robert died, and this allows her husband to go off and conquer Normandy in her name. Completely in her name. So Matilda is still waging war in England, but she's got Normandy for sure. And so Matilda and Stephen start to work out a deal. And that is involving her son, and I'd ask you, what's he called? And you'd guess William, and you'd be wrong, because he's actually Henry. See, but they're still not original in their naming patterns. So her son Henry was granted Normandy. And in 1153, he forced Stephen to take him as his heir. And that was the compromise. Okay, Matilda won't be queen, but her son Henry will be king of England when Stephen dies. In the meantime, Henry has got married to this lady. He's done here as Henry II. He's married Eleanor of Aquitaine, another kick-ass woman of the Middle Ages. This means that when Stephen shuffles off this mortal coil in 1154, Henry is Duke of Normandy, of Aquitaine, Count of Anjou, and King of England. He's a rich boy. This whole period that I just described to you between Matilda and Stephen is called the Anarchy. Here they are again. And you can see that this lasted for a whole 10 years, from roughly 1140 to 1150. The Anarchy. Anarchy means unrest, everything's gone crazy, there's no government, and that's reflecting the period of civil war and how extensive it was in England. So to go to Matilda's son. He becomes Henry II, and he has all of this land. All of this land that is coloured reds, pinks, or oranges on this map. He's got a big chunk of this land through his family. So he's got Kingdom of England up at the top there because he's done a deal with Stephen and he gets to inherit the land. He's got Normandy because, you know, his dad fought for it after his uncle, yes, died. He's got Maine, Anjou, and Touraine from his dad. He's got more lands from his mum. And then he married Eleanor of Aquitaine. Now, look at this map here, and you see where it says Duchy of Aquitaine. It might be so big you might not even see it, but it's above the purple of the county of Toulouse. All of this land around there, Gascony, Poitou, Auvergne, that's all Aquitaine. Eleanor is super, super eye-wateringly rich and powerful in her own right. She was still young. She'd inherited these lands as the sole female heiress from her father and grandfather. She was immensely wealthy and still very young at this time. Because this is still, you know, a very male-dominated age, that Eleanor was appropriately married was really important to them. Yeah, you know, I mean, to us today, we'd be like, Eleanor could have just ruled in her own right, and she could have, but she would have had to deal with a lot of invasions, had she, being the Duchess of Aquitaine. So therefore, when she was still quite young, when it became apparent that she was the heir, she was married off pretty quickly to the King of France. And the King of France, they're also not original in their naming patterns. He was called Louis. So she married Louis, and Louis has the green part on this map. And when he married Eleanor, he also got all of her lands, that big chunk called Aquitaine down in the bottom left. This was important for Eleanor because this is not a very nice time. Eleanor, totally being this rich and powerful, would have been abducted and forced into marriage. So she wanted to act first by marrying the King of France. They thought this was a good power move. But they went on crusade together. They went on the Second Crusade together, and their marriage totally broke down when they were on crusade. It got so vicious between them that the Pope actually dissolved their marriage and said, oh no, they should never have got married in the first place. They're no longer married. Now, this meant that Louis had to give back all of Eleanor's lands to her, which, you know, sucked for him, but was good for her. So they must have really hated each other for that to happen. But she's back in the situation of being still a young woman. She's had kids with the King of France, but she's still definitely within childbearing age. And the kids that she's had with the King of France, the ones that have survived, are girls. So she's still, you know, very vulnerable. She very quickly marries the young Duke of Normandy. He's not even King of England at this point, Henry. He pitches up. He's so much younger than she is. But, you know, he seems like he's going to be a good bet. And, you know, unite their lands. So at first, everybody was like, well, gosh, Eleanor's come down in the world marrying that guy. He's got hardly anything. He's only got Normandy. But obviously, he gets England as well. And look at that map. All the orangey stuff is theirs. So it was a good marriage in the end. They're also famous for the sons that they had. I'm going to flip back to our family tree. So, oh, no, they're not here. Oh, no, they are. There they are. Henry, I'm looking at Henry III. Henry II, Eleanor of Aquitaine, the House of Angevin. We're going to explain what that is in a minute. Their sons, Richard I. That's Richard the Lionheart, which everybody's heard of, at least just because of Robin Hood. Likewise, the sad-looking John next to him. So King John, the one who's got a bad rap, again, Robin Hood, they were both their children. So this means, and this is going to be really, really important to us going forward in this class, the kings of England, look at this map, they have more land in France than the King of France. A lot more land. And you know what? It's better land too. There's vineyards, there's trade routes, there's castles. Those are good prime spot lands in France. When Eleanor and Henry II die, obviously all of these territories are left to their children. They're united and inherited. So that means that the subsequent King of England have all of these orangey bits. The kings of England are then known as the Angevins, and the lands that they govern become known as the Angevin Empire. There's that many of them. So the name Angevin is a period in the overall dynasty, which is called the Plantagenets, and the name comes from Anjou. That Matilda's husband, Geoffrey of Anjou, Henry's father, was the Count of Anjou. They take their name from Anjou, even though it's quite small compared to all their other massive lands. But look, we're talked about England, we've talked about France, but that isn't even all that the Normans are up to. They also managed to take Ireland, my country, where I'm from, in 1169, and that is our friend Henry II, or rather under his reign. In 1169, a force of very loosely associated Norman knights pitch up in the southeast of Ireland, and they are requested to have done this by an Irish king of this area called Dermot MacMurrough. That's him there on the right. He was King of Leinster, he had lost his position, and so he decided to go and ask Henry II for help. Henry II blows him off, but, you know, these are Normans. These are tough guys. They're fighters, and they like being rich and powerful. So Dermot MacMurrough's pleas definitely do not fall on deaf ears. Instead, he manages to pick up a fairly ambitious group of younger sons who come back to him and start to conquer Ireland, well, in their own names. These Normans quickly conquer the eastern part of Ireland, and they set up their government in Dublin, still the capital city of Ireland. Over time, the size of this area decreases until the area under English control becomes known as the Pale. So if you've ever heard of the phrasing, oh, that's really beyond the Pale, that's a reference to this historical process. But, of course, this little upstart does not land very well on King Henry II's ears. So on the 18th of October, 1171, Henry II lands in Ireland with a much bigger army to ensure that he takes control of the whole affair. So he takes Dublin, everybody, the kings, the Irish kings, the bishops, the archbishops, the Normans that are there, have to give fealty to him. So that by 1172, he has created the Lordship of Ireland, and this is added to his Angevin Empire. Funnily enough, a lot of these Normans aren't actually from England or Normandy at all. They're actually from Wales. The reason that they're from Wales is because they've been buying up land in Wales. There's no official conquest at this time of Wales. That comes later. Just lots of good trading and buying of land instead. So they've actually kind of already added the south of Wales too, but just not officially. And if that's not enough, there's Italy. Now, if I was in class, I'd say, what is Italy? And you'd all tell me Italy's a hot mess. Well, guess what? It's still a hot mess. We're interested in the south of Italy. This had been part of Byzantium, and this had also, particularly the island of Sicily, which if you imagine the shape of Italy, you know, it kicks a football, Sicily is the football, had been under Muslim control. It had been back and forth through Muslim hands, Byzantine hands, Italian hands, Pope's hands, hundreds of years. In reality, it's a total hot mess. If we go back to 1016, we have the Normans getting involved here and seizing up Italy as being a pretty good hot mess. So they're asked to come in as mercenaries to intervene in the local noble struggle between the Greeks, which are the Byzantines, and the Muslims, and they're like, hey, can you come and give us a hand? You're really good warriors, you're really good fighters, we're going to pay for you to come from Normandy. But of course, the mercenaries were really good at doing this kind of stuff, and they became very powerful, and lots of other Normans followed them. And so going to Italy also became a way to make fame and fortune for the Normans. Normandy, let's flick back to the map. Normandy, there it is up at the top. It's not a very big area, and there's a lot of guys here who are very capable, second sons, not going to inherit the land, who are pretty restless. Best thing for them is to go to Ireland, go to Wales, go to Sicily, and try and get some land. It's a big motivation. One family in particular go from fair obscurity in Normandy to becoming hugely significant in Italian history. That's the sons of Tancred of Hauteville. Robert Guiscard, and Guiscard means the Wily, which tells you about him, and another son, Roger, who becomes known as Roger of Sicily because he does so well in Sicily. But they're the two most famous, Robert and Roger, but actually lots of his sons did really well for themselves in Italy. So these Normans, these Guiscards, expanded in Italy, in the south of Italy and in the island of Sicily at the expense of the Byzantines and the Muslims. They actually have even gone to war with the Byzantines by the end of the 11th century. In 1080 to 1085, the Normans attacked the Byzantines to try and conquer even more land off them. This means that the Normans in Italy and the Byzantines have a really, really bad relationship. Roger takes Sicily and he builds up a really strong area of Norman influence there. That's a picture of one of the castles he built there on the right-hand side. So a major result of this was the Normans brought with them their favourite thing, well, one of their favourite things to all these new areas, what we call in this class the bad F word, that is feudalism. And we're going to learn all about that in next week's class.